Hi guys, welcome to an episode of Hidden Gems. It is just me in the studio today, but I have an amazing guest that's on, Vienna Pharaon. I am so excited because I read her book, The Origins of You. What an amazing, amazing book. I read it earlier this year. Actually, I always like a new book in the beginning of the year. And I've followed her for, I don't know, I followed Vienna for I don't know when I started following you, but just I don't know, maybe I saw a video, someone sent it to me, whatever, and I was like, I like what she's talking about. So I have followed her for a while. And then I was like, let me pick up this book because I kind of download my books, and then I'm like, okay, I'll get to that one. So I read it at the beginning of this year, and we started a conversation about having her on the pod, and we're finally here. So Vienna, welcome to Hidden Gems, our Hidden Gems community. I'm so glad that you are here to join us today and talk about all the things. I love when our guests introduce themselves to the community, so please go ahead, tell everyone who you are.
Well, thanks, love. I'm excited to be here, excited to see where this conversation goes. I'm a marriage and family therapist in New York. I've been working with individuals and couples and families for many, many years now. I think 17 years now. I've seen over 25,000 hours of direct clinical work with people. And my work is really rooted in understanding the family systems, the family of origin that we grew up in, and how that really sets the foundation and the framework and the trajectory of our lives. I obviously know and understand that there's plenty of other influences that affect us along the way, but my work is really about going back, not getting stuck there. We don't stay there forever, right? But going back and really understanding some of those foundational pieces and how they're still kind of running the show, owning the show today. A lot of times people come into therapy and they're like, I want to talk about this thing that's going on in my life right now. And then when you're like, okay, so let's go back to when you were a kiddo. And they're like, no. Why do we have to do that? And, my hope is that this conversation, my work, the book that I wrote, right, that those are things that help people really understand why we do go back to be able to move forward, because the patterns in our lives today that are unwanted, that we can't shake, that we can't change no matter how hard we're trying, we keep pursuing the emotionally unavailable person, we keep not setting the boundary that we promised that we're going to set. Those are the things, right, that are pointing to irresolution from the past, that there's some pain, there's some wounds that we need to address. And so, that's my work. I have a book out in the world called The Origins of You, like you said, how breaking family patterns can liberate the way we live and love. And that book is, it's a baby to me for sure. And I'm so glad that I wrote it. I'm so glad that I know not everybody's going to go to therapy, but my hope is that, sometimes in the comfort of our own home or at a pace that works for us, we can start to do some of the work that other people might be doing in therapy for ourselves. And so, thank you for your kind words about the book.
Yes. So, we are pro boundaries here at Hidden Gems, and you have a whole chapter about boundaries. And before we really dive into the book, I want to know what made you decide to go on this journey to start doing this work. Was there a pivotal moment in your life specifically where you were like, okay, I need to change some things for myself, and then you started for yourself, and then you wanted to help people? Or how did that come about?
It's a great question. I always say that therapists get into the line of work of therapy, whether we know it or not, to resolve what's unresolved in our own lives. And your girl did not know what was unresolved in her life. I was your classic, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm unaffected. My parents went through a 9-year divorce process, which was the longest in the state of New Jersey at the time. And
Wow.
I was in first grade when the separation started. I'm an only child. My parents, it was a highly conflictual divorce, and there was a lot of gaslighting and manipulation and psychological abuse and paranoia and emotional flooding. It was a hard system to be a part of, and to be so tiny, in that system. And I mentioned being an only child because I didn't have siblings. There was nobody else around to sort of check and be like, you see what I see? It's that wasn't going on.
This isn't okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
And so from a really early age, though, my perception of my parents was that they were crashing and burning, which was true. It's they were not well. They were in their chaos. They were in their conflict. They were underwater. And for me, as a little girl, I felt like I needed to be fine. I needed to not add and contribute to the fire that was already burning. And so I started to present to the world like I was unaffected by this and that I was good. And I got good at the things that I put my mind to, whether it was sports or playing the violin or like learning German or, whatever it was, right? It's like, I just like put my energy into that. And I would say that most people would have looked at me and been like, that is a well-rounded child, right? Like, wow, she's handling this divorce, so well. And I think I did present to the world in that way. I was a really good actress. And I think my parents kind of fell for it too, that like, she's okay. Like she's doing all right through this. I even fell for it. Like was so convincing of like, no, I am okay. I am fine. I am unaffected. And so, I was, it's sort of the classic, all my friends come to me to seek advice or people want to talk to me about what's going on in their lives, right? So there's this part of me that as I grew up and got a little bit older and, in university studied psychology and sort of was like the basic entry point into this work. But ultimately I was like, oh, yeah, like I think, yeah, I'm good. I'm good at this thing. Like people come to me, they want to talk to me. But I still didn't realize like where my work was in all of it. Now, there was a part of me that I think had some understanding that my parents' relationship was not a good model for me. I think I was fear-based at one point that like, I don't know that I wouldn't end up like them. And so what do I need to do, right, to actually learn what goes into creating a healthy, functional relationship? And so there was a part of me that I think, yeah, like wanted to go to school for that. But did not know what was about to happen in my life. So
but you knew that their relationship was one that you did not want to model.
totally.
Okay. Great. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, that was super clear to me. And neither one of my parents remarried. Neither one of them really like dated afterwards. And so there was like all of these subtle messages too. I remember like waking up one day in my 20s being like, wow, I never saw my parents love again. Like, and as a kid being like, you get one shot, like that's it, And even though that wasn't an explicit message, I remember being like, wow, like the intensity of some of these messages that come through, whether they are explicit or just implied, are significant. So fast forward, I go to grad school, I find a program, and when you go to school for therapy, it's your own therapy.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Have you had been to therapy before you decided to go to grad school for therapy yet?
No. I mean, I think I had like one-offs where maybe as a kiddo, I'd go see a child psychologist or, I spoke to, like a clergy member, something like that, like somewhere along the way. I'm like, this is bogus. Like, I don't think this is really helping. But I get into grad school and I am still holding on to the story, Natasha, that my parents' divorce didn't affect me at all. I'm good. I'm fine. My parents, actually, the development of their relationship was a really interesting one because it allowed for that story to continue. They became really good friends. My parents would come to my lacrosse. Yeah. My parents would come to my lacrosse games in college. They would drive there together. We would do holidays together. I mean, it like really, there was such a flip, and I credit a lot of that to their work, but it allowed me to continue to pretend. And so I like made it through grad school, just like holding on to the story that I was fine, that their divorce didn't do anything to me. And it probably wasn't until my mid 20s, late 20s, where I started to like, I mean, I think conceptually I understood it to some degree, but the story that it didn't affect me protected me from needing to feel. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't know how to I knew how to hold vulnerability for other people. Anybody could tell me I was so good at that. But if the role had to reverse, I had no clue how to do that. And that was something that was like really interesting for me to understand is like, oh, I had to hold on to this story because it was never okay for me to actually express myself. I had put that away so many 2 decades earlier, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
you don't get to feel here. There's no room for you to feel. There isn't space for you to feel if you feel it's going to be too much for the system. And so for so long, I was really disconnected from myself. And, grad school, I think I was a good enough therapist in those early, young, early years where I could hold space for other people and we could have really good conversations. But there was also a limitation to where I could go because I couldn't go there with my own self. And so a catalyst was dating someone in my mid late 20s, which often is. And his ex had come back into the picture. She wanted to be back with him. And he was contemplating whether staying in the relationship with me or going back into the relationship with her. And
Oh my God.
cue it up.
And he was open about that.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, well, brace yourself. Because then I'm like, of course, take all the time you need. I understand. This must be so hard for you, right? Like it's not just the therapist in me that understands that there's context and there's layers and there's complexity, but the me who is, I'm fine, I'm unaffected, nothing bothers me, I have no boundaries, right? Like this needless little girl was a needless woman who held that cool girl persona, whatever you need, totally fine, got it. And it came out of me just like it was the easiest thing for me to say. And I remember having a conversation with a friend, a couple weeks into him in this contemplation and him spending time with her and all this stuff. And I remember it clicking in where I was like, wow, this is the same role that I embodied as a child that I'm embodying now. This like fly under the radar, I'm fine, I'm unaffected, it's all good. And it all sort of came surging out. For whatever reason, there was just clarity in it. And I remember there comes a point in it where I pick up the phone and I call him and I say, I'm actually not fine. I am actually affected by what's happening here. It feels really disrespectful. I'm going to pull myself out of this equation as you're trying to figure out whether you want to be with her or not, but I'm not going to be with you. And it's interesting because that might sound really simple to people to be like, I'm actually hurting or I am affected. But for somebody who's never said those words before, this moment was a life-changing moment. It's not hyperbolic,
Yes.
right? This was a moment that pivoted something in my life in a really significant way. What I want to say about it was, I just saw you with your hands up and I appreciate you cheering for me. It was not a mic drop moment for me though. I was like, on the bathroom floor. I did not feel empowered. I wasn't like, yeah, go girl. Like this was a moment of death for me, right? I was like, there were tears. And I think it's really important to say that because oftentimes in our healing, oftentimes in our change, oftentimes in these moments where we move from survival to choice, it does not feel good. It feels awful. It feels terrible. And it's like we objectively know, like, yes, that was the thing. You did the thing. That was the moment. But it feels terrible because of how unfamiliar it is, because of what it is that we're actually having to tolerate for the first time in our lives. I had to tolerate something that I had been avoiding tolerating, right? It was like, oh my gosh, I could maintain relationships by disconnecting from myself or not having boundaries, but at least I kept the relationship, right? Like this was me ending a relationship. And, to be honest, there was a period of time where it's like, is he going to call and like say I made the biggest mistake of my life? It's like, of course that entered in,
and you want that. Yes,
you
obviously.
want that from like your wounded place,
Right.
But it's like and we never spoke again after that moment, nothing. And it was truly one of the most transformative moments of my life because it really was this shift from the familiar to the unfamiliar, this experience of teaching myself that I could tolerate expressing my voice, that I could tolerate saying that I am not okay, that like that can happen and I can live. And again, I don't mean for that to sound super dramatic, but it was like, okay, I'm still here, like sure, this relationship is over, but like I'm still here. And so I would say this work, it is both our personal lives and the beautiful work that I get to do with the clients that I get to walk alongside of day in and day out, who show me that change is possible and how important it is for us to understand our origin stories and our family systems and those things that oftentimes we just survive our way through and never really get a chance to fully process or acknowledge or honor. And so, yeah, it was just such an invitation for my own work that on, some level I conceptually understood, but I needed to live through it myself to some degree. And then I continued to do it and I continue to do it. And it doesn't end, like you said before, right? There's no moment of arrival. But yeah, that was a bit of the
That was a big
initiation.
moment.
Yeah,
That was a
it
big
really
moment. And
was.
I will say that there is I'm pretty sure it was Joe Dispenza that said it. He was talking about meditation, and he was like, when you have a breakthrough in meditation, you can no longer go back to the person you were. You are now a person who has had a breakthrough in meditation. And that's kind of how I feel. And I don't know if this is just all people or if it's specific to women. There is a moment when women take their power, and although it's hard and it does suck for I remember a moment that I had in my career when I had to feel like it was really hard to do. I really was like, okay, because I'm just happy to be here. I'm just yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do yes, girl, because I'm just happy to be working for this really big company, right? And then I had to do something that I didn't want to do and have a conversation that could have been that could have been a conflict, and after I was like, oh, I can do this. That was scary, but I can do this. And so it's like when you have that moment, like you said, even though it sucked, even though you were heartbroken, obviously, because you're like mourning this relationship, now you are a person you finally did it. And you are no longer a person who's never done it, if that makes sense, right? And then we become this person who's like, okay, well, I did it that one time now. Can I do it again? Until it becomes that practice. And I think that, when you do this work again, it's practice. It's all practice, and we're practicing. And when we go back to your point and to your book, when we go back to when we were a child and we realize where these patterns come from, we have to kind of break these patterns and start new ones and form new ones. And that becomes it's a real practice, because when we're kids, we're just kind of like, I think, in survival. And in your mind, even when you were a kid, it's like, I see all this chaos happening. It's survival. You didn't know that if you went to your mom one day crying, like, oh no, this is really affecting me, that you don't know what she was going to do because you didn't do it, right? And then you form this layer of like protection around yourself because this is your child's survival mode, and you bring it to adulthood, and then our adult feelings end up being so different. And we're like, wait, we can't operate like this anymore, right?
Yeah, it's so well said. It's so well said. It's I've said that where it's like you do it once. Like all it takes is once for your system, right? For your body, for your experience to be like, okay, I did it and I'm still here. Like it's okay, and again, not that it's easy, not that there are things that don't, right, like that can still feel really hard to tolerate, but there is something that does unlock. And I love what you're saying about that, because it is so true. And my husband and I, we laugh about it. He's like, I don't know that version of you ever that's been like, it's fine. He's like, you would never say it's fine.
Yeah.
I've never heard you say, oh, it's fine. He's like, you are very clear about the things that are not fine and what you are affected by. Like you do not hold that back. And we laugh about that, but it's something so beautiful, right? It's like, it does unlock something for us. And it is a muscle, right? What you're describing is this muscle that we continue to strengthen day in and day out. The same way that anybody, if you've ever done anything new, right? It's like you go for a run for the first time and you're like, woo, that half a mile like kicked my ass, and it's like, not, you do it over and over and over and over and over again. And these are the things that strengthen us. and it doesn't mean that we're always like that it's some linear thing that we only go in this one direction. Like we can do-si-do a little bit and we can backstep and we can do this and we can do that. And that is going to present, but that there is so much healing actually in the dance of this, even when we're still headed in that direction, even if it's not like one step, one step, one step.
And I like that, like even what you're saying, like that person, it's like there is benefits. Some people in your life really benefit from you being the cool girl and the yes girl because they're like, oh, she's down, she's whatever, like, you know. And then, but the people who actually want to see you grow, I'm like, I would be mortified if someone was just not okay with something that I was doing and they're just cool girl about it, or cool guy about it. I want you to be comfortable. And if you're not, then I welcome a conversation and vice versa, right? But those are the people who really want to see you for you, and they're not trying to push you into the box that they want you in, right?
Well, you're a good friend to have then. Right? Because
Yeah.
I think for a lot
Yeah.
of times, and no, it's true though, like when I'm talking to people where they're contemplating like, okay, how am I going to set a boundary? Or, I am really scared to disappoint someone, right? And we're like, okay, is there a friend in your life where there's tolerance there, where you can say like, listen, Natasha, I am in therapy and I'm working on disappointing someone. And as much as I'm going to
Yes.
I'm going to practice saying no to you, or I'm going to practice disappointing you, right? Like, yeah, I want to hang out, or yeah, I want to go out on a Friday with you and I want to show up, but I haven't slept, or I have had like a really terrible week and I really just need to stay in. Like, I want to practice this with you. And like to have a friend like you who's like, yeah, yeah, go
Let's
ahead.
go.
Like, let's go.
Yeah.
I can tolerate that. Like, I'm not going to hate you. I'm not going to kick you out of the friend group. I'm not going to give you the silent treatment as punishment. I'm not going to not invite you next weekend when we do the same thing. It's like that there is safety to be able to be expressed as a human, to honor yourself in whatever moment it is. And so, yeah, like people like you are good to be around to say, like, bring yourself here and it will be respected and it will be honored. That's not the situation though with everyone, unfortunately. It's
It's
like
not.
that's what makes it
And
tricky.
right, and that's when things change. Like I'll even, now with dating, right? And your self-worth. And when a girl is dating a good guy, like he's a good guy, and she's like, all in the air, it's like, oh well, there'll be times when people aren't necessarily happy for you, and so they give you shit for that, right? And I just think that in communication, because you have a whole chapter in your book about communication and it's great, and I think that what you call it, when you honor your voice, and I think that in any time someone has a new transition, I think that a lot of people, however you present or show up for them, they want you to continue to do that. But obviously we have circumstances. You're about to have a baby, your life's about to change, you're going to have a newborn, so maybe you can't be on the phone with your friend for 2 hours when they're going through their turmoil or whatever, right? And so when we're setting those boundaries but also honoring our voice, do you have like advice or a time or when you could say like, if you haven't done it before, this is how you should probably go about it or try to go about it? And saying, like you said, calling a friend is amazing. And that's like such a gem and amazing advice to practice with. And my sister and I do that all the time. But if someone's like, it's so hard for me to speak up and say how I really feel, do you have advice for them? And that's in a relationship with a parent, with a kid, with a mom, with, a relationship, anything.
Yeah. Well, from my standpoint in my work, I always want to understand what the story is around bringing the voice forward, right? What was
Mm-hmm.
it like for you to bring your voice forward as a kid? Was it respected? Was it
Yes.
minimized? And not just your own experience, because the observation experience is also really important, meaning what was it like to see the adults in my life honor their voice or not honor their voice, and what associations are attached to that as well. And so I want to look again at the origins of honoring or dishonoring our voice. When we struggle to honor our voice, it's because we are protecting something. If I were to tell you how I actually feel, if I were to express myself, if I were to honor whatever it is that's going on here, what is the risk to me? Are people going to get angry? Are people going to become abusive? Are people going to shut down and give me the silent treatment? I got that one. My dad was really good at that. When I was well behaved and good girl and all of that, super present, super available, super helpful. The moment that I was a little bit more difficult, the punishment was the silent treatment, right? So I learned, like, don't say stuff, like, don't, like, you have to be
Don't say
who,
anything. Yeah.
right? You have to be, or you have to present in the way that other people are going to want you to, in order to maintain connection, maintain presence, maintain the attachment, right? And so we're looking at what is the history, what are our experiences when it comes to bringing our voice forward. Did you get mocked? You know, maybe you said, "Oh, this is how I'm feeling, and so I don't want to do that." And then a parent was like, "Oh, you're a piece of
Oh,
shit,"
you're
or "Oh,
feeling
you're a
like
pussy," "Oh,
that?
you're this,"
Yeah.
like, "Man up," da 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 da, right?
Yes.
Like, that there was a
Yes.
response, right? That was really belittling, that was really derogatory, that was just cutting, and then we learn, like, I'm not going to do that again. Why would I do that again? Right? Like, here's the hurt and the harm that winds up happening. Or another example of it is that if you do honor your voice and then, mom would become really sad, and she'd lock herself in her room. Or, it's like everybody has obviously really unique personal experiences. And part of this work is about understanding and making contact with your own. What was my experience of being able to honor my voice? And what happened that took me away from honoring it? What my story that I shared at the beginning of this conversation, right, is a really good example of why it was hard for me to bring my voice forward. Right? There is a big story that is there. And so this idea that we're going to somehow, like, we're going to listen to this conversation and all of a sudden the people who struggle with honoring their voice are going to go ahead and honor their voice in 2
Yeah,
hours
yeah,
from now.
yeah.
Not going to happen,
No, no.
right? Your job
Right.
is to really identify what gets in the way and what it is that you are protecting from, because it is a brilliant system. Your system is a brilliant system. The reason you don't honor your voice, it's protecting you from something based on your history, based on your past experiences. It's amazing. However, I think to your point, guess what? If you keep living life that way, what's going to happen? You're going to stay in relationships where you don't get to have communication, where the boundaries are not available for you, right? It's like, it's going to lead you astray. And so part of this work is, to understand and identify our origin stories. But in that, we also have to feel. We can't just say, okay, now I understand why I do what I do. Now I'm going to just do it differently. That's
Yes.
not how it works with
No.
people, right?
That's not how it
Like,
works.
it's not how it
That's not
works,
how it
because you
works.
would just
No.
change. You would just choose that, and you would just go ahead and live your life differently. That's why people come to therapy and are like, I have been trying to do this thing, but I keep dating these people, or I keep doing this and I keep doing that. And the part that we're missing is it's the witnessing and it's the grieving, because a lot of times we want to jump over needing to feel what is present in our lives when we start to acknowledge, like, oh, wow, the reason I can't honor my voice, or the reason I don't feel worthy in relationships, or the reason that I never feel like a priority, or what is, like, here is this experience that needs to be acknowledged. Here is this part of my story that I haven't spent time with, that where I haven't actually witnessed the pain that I endured, what was lost, what was taken from me, what was robbed from me all those years ago. And that there hasn't been space and time for me to grieve, right? The authentic expression of emotion when we witness ourselves, or when we're witnessed by someone else. That is so vital. I always say to people, when stuck, grieve more. When stuck, grieve
Right.
more, right? When you can't
Mm.
create change, right? When you can't do the thing that you do. Because listen, you're not an idiot and you're not lazy. Let me tell you that, right? People are like, I'm smart. Why can't I get this? It's like, it's not about that, right? It's like
It's not
you haven't
about
spent
that.
enough time feeling. You're trying to bypass that part. You'd be like, can I do this healing work without grieving? No, you cannot. Like, no, you got to go in, right? You got to feel some of this. You don't have to get stuck there. You don't have to get stuck there, okay? But you do have to let yourself feel and be moved by it. I believe that healing, yeah, I know we use that word and it's a buzzword and like, people are like, what does it really mean? But I believe that healing is the process of going from survival to choice. And that in order to go from survival to choice, right, we have to witness and we have to grieve. You cannot just choose differently. That is not how it works. And so if you just keep bumping up against something over and over and over again, I can't honor my voice, I can't set this boundary, I keep choosing these types of people to date over and over again, even though I see the red flags and I know it's terrible and I know it's this and I know it's that, right? When we are doing those things, right, we are skipping over a really important part of the process. And that's the
Yep.
invitation, of this work is to be in the witnessing and the grieving so that we have an opportunity to choose differently and tolerate something that is tolerable, that we can discern for ourselves. But we can't go there if we haven't done some of that preliminary work that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. So this is when you were talking, what came up is like you were saying, this grieving point that we have. So there's also, I think, grieving a part of us that we are going to let go of and that we've been with for so long. I look at, like you were saying, it's like I look at myself 10 years ago, the way that I operate in relationships, be it with friendships, be it with people, I'm still me and I still am myself, but I choose, like you said, going through a choice, and it's not survival. There's so many people, and I used to wonder, like, even when I was in my people pleasing mode, it's like, why do I need to keep these people in my life? It's like you're like gathering people, like, it's so important to be the most popular person, right? And the older you get, you realize it's like, I'd rather have 2 solid friends than 100 not solid friends who just are around for whatever, right? So you get to that point when you start realizing, like, it's not a popularity contest. Why am I just like trying to hold people in my life who don't really see me? Because when I do speak up or when I do say something, then you're met with the, aggression or the conflict or the thing. And you're like, well, but this is what I need right now. And no one else cares about what I need right now. And it's tough because as you again go through this and you making choices for yourself, sometimes other people are making choices for themselves, and it doesn't clash. It doesn't go together. And that's okay. And that's what I had to realize. It's like, it's okay if this person doesn't agree, or if this person doesn't want to be your friend anymore, or this person, because that, it's cliche, reason, season, or a lifetime. But it is true that some people come to our lives to get us to a certain point. And if we're going to continue to grow, that person may not come with us, or, they may not belong in the Natasha who I am today. They might not accept this Natasha. They only want the people pleasing Natasha, and I think for the listeners, there's a moment when we're talking about this and it's like, it's hard, but the reward of what's hard, it's like when you go to the gym and you're like, oh my God, I'm dripping in sweat. It's like that emotional sweat is coming off of you, and you are going to come out so much stronger. Even though it's hard, it's building strength and emotional strength and personal strength, right?
It's, when we do this work, I do think it strengthens our ability to tolerate the losses that we're going to face. And I think what you're describing is getting to a place where, yeah, if I set this boundary or if I communicate this thing, I know that I'm risking losing something. Even with the story I
Yes.
shared, right? It's like to say, I'm taking myself out of the equation. I don't feel okay here. I don't feel respected here. I don't want to be in the relationship with you, right? It's like, I had to tolerate that the relationship was ending.
Ending. And
There
if you
is
said
grief
nothing,
there. Right.
right, but if you said nothing, then it's like, okay, well, maybe he'll choose me, maybe he'll choose her. I don't know. And like, instead of you, and either way, you're not
Either
feeling good.
way, right.
Yeah,
Either way.
either way,
But I
you're not
think
feeling good.
it's what you're talking about is us getting to a place where we can tolerate the consequence that's going to happen, right? The outcome. And most of the time, when we're not doing those things yet, it's because we're not able to tolerate what the outcome, what the consequence might be for us, right? And
Oof.
so you could sit here though and say it's going to be the best thing. Well, it doesn't matter to people. If they're not there, they're not there yet, right? Because when you live it and you're like, okay, I survived, it's like we can cheerlead everybody else and say, it's good, it's good, it's good. Like go in that direction, you will be okay. But people really have to get to that place where they are choosing to risk something. And I believe that we get to that place where we're willing to risk something when we spend enough time witnessing and grieving, because there's a part of us that realizes what has been lost, what has been taken, what has been robbed. And then otherwise, what happens is we continue to allow that to happen. So the choice becomes, I have to risk something. Yeah, it's going to suck. Yeah, there's going to be something that feels awful about this. But because I have spent the time witnessing, grieving, like really being in the emotion of all of this, I do have the experience and understanding and wisdom that continuing to maintain status quo is more hurtful, more harmful to me than risking and tolerating something that is unfamiliar.
Yes.
It's not an
Yes.
easy
Yes.
walk in the park. Okay. I'm not suggesting that people just like, okay, snap your fingers and here, like, let's go. But we like, that is the work. And, you are describing it beautifully. But this work to me is like, what can I get to a place where I can tolerate the discomfort? Can I tolerate that outcome?
That's a really wonderful way to put it. And so, process. Do you have a process when you are met with conflict or something that you have to have a tough conversation with, that you're like, okay, how am I going to deal with this? Or do you just let it rip and be like, you know what? Where it flies, it flies.
So at this point in my life, yes, I'm pretty good at being in the moment, being able to handle the things that come up, whether it's with a friend or a partner, etc. When it's probably more specifically with my husband, if we're in a place where we've kind of lost it, where like
Mm.
we can't be reasonable anymore, my go-to is like I'll
Yes.
become like the point prover. I need to be right, or we have like these funny names for ourselves. Like he becomes the jackhammer, and we're like, okay, we are also pretty good. Like if he enters into that space, like we will exit.
I'm
We're like,
exiting.
I'm not having this conversation. And you cannot suck me into this. We're not entering into it. Like we're not going back and forth. Like usually if one of us is aware enough, then we're safe. Now, if we're both in it like this, that's where it can be really hard. And I think sometimes people will put a therapist on like, oh, you must be so good at and we are. I feel like I'm pretty good at it, but of course I have my human moments where like I
Of
can't get out of my
course.
own way and I'm proving my point and I'm doing my thing. Like that happened. What I will say is the thing that's really important is that we try to repair as quickly as possible. So when there are ruptures, I've heard this before where like couples will race to be right instead of racing to repair. And I think that
Mm.
that shift for us has been really powerful where it's like, who can get there first, right? Like, how can we race to repair what just happened here? Meaning, like, I want
Wow.
to hear you, or I want to acknowledge what you went through, right? Like, okay, let's put this down. Let's put the need to self-protect down and actually pick up the need to relationally protect, which means I want to hear what you're experiencing. I want to understand the impact of what I did or what I said or whatever the thing was. And can we prioritize that? So, yes, sometimes we need some time
That's
away.
deep.
Yeah, sometimes we need some time away. Sometimes we need to sleep on it, but my husband and I are pretty good at coming back to each other within,
Hmm.
within the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Race to repair. That is a gem. Yeah, that's really great. I need it on a shirt. I need it on a sweater. I need it
I
on a
know, right? The
hat.
swag.
That's,
Uh-huh.
yeah, that'd be great. That race to repair. That's like, it's amazing because like you said, it's how do we fix this, and it's like who's gonna, yeah, that's great. So do you think from all of your time doing this, have you seen any trends in relationships where you're like, there was this study and it was like the therapist sat down with them and within the first 5 minutes they could tell if they were going to stay
Yeah.
together or not.
The
Do
Gottmans.
you,
Uh-huh.
you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that they're like race to repair? I think that goes in the like gem bucket of like, this is how you should be almost operating in your relationship versus the alternative, which is the race to be right. Do you have any things like that where you're like, I see this being a successful relationship because this is how these people operate?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that kills relationships is when resentment builds. And resentment is able to be built when we let things go for too long and they keep building and growing and going, right? And I'll get messages from people whenever I do like a Q&A on Instagram or something like that, and it's like there will always be someone who's like, I've been resentful towards my partner for 20 years, and you're like, right? Like, it's like these things that build and build and build and build and build. And there's something called the low negativity threshold when it comes to relationships, specifically partnership, but I think this will make sense in friendship as well, right? Where this idea that I'm going to pick and choose my battles, or I'm going to I'm not going to bring this thing forward because I don't want to like make a big to do about it. And this idea that if we do that, we're better off. We're not better off. What we see is that couples who actually have a low negativity threshold, meaning that the amount of negativity that they are willing to tolerate before it hits a particular line is really low before they say something about it. That is actually
Oh,
where there's a lot of value, health, success in relationships. Basically, if you do something that bothers me, I'm just going to tell you about it. I'm going to nip it in the bud, right? Instead of like trying to find a way to not address it, not be the annoying person who's like, oh, that bothered me. It's like all these reasons why we try to tuck those things away. To have relationships where we can say like, hey, I didn't love that. And, that person
right.
then is able to say, oh, I'm sorry. Like, yeah, I can see that. And then it goes, then it's gone, right? As opposed to us not doing that over and over and over again and having those things build up, or not knowing how to honor our voice. I mean, it's coming full circle, not being able to set the boundary. And because I didn't set the boundary, now I have resentment towards you, right? It's like all of these things, like our ability to be expressed is so, so vital. Our ability to be able to move through conflict well is so, so vital. Our ability, and I know some of the ones of like, make sure that you express gratitude. Like, they sometimes feel so frivolous. They're so significant, right? To be able to express gratitude, to be able to
Yes.
express appreciation, to not get into this space where it's like, well, you should do that. It's like, right? Like how minimizing, how invalidating, right? When we go into that space, instead of being appreciative and acknowledging the contributions that we are putting into the relationship, into our lives, into, whatever it is that we're managing, these things are so, so, so important. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that, in relationship, we want to be seen, we want to be understood, we want to be heard, we want to be comprehended, right? We want the depth most of the time, right? Some people maybe don't, but I think ultimately, right, like if you're wanting to have a quality relationship, right, like that is what people are seeking. And, to again, through my framework of really caring about how we grew up and our family of origin, like to understand the underpinnings of ourselves and each other, right? Relational awareness, right? Is like, I understand your story. When I can understand your story in depth, right? As opposed to you're just this person who I know in this moment in time, that makes such a huge difference because we have context, right? Because we have history. And so instead of just like, oh, you just did this, like I hold your whole story at all times. And when I hold your whole story at all times, then I see you for something bigger than just this moment, than just your reactivity, than just your way of responding. And like, I understand where your pain is coming from, or you understand where my pain is coming from. We say context is so valuable. It's not an excuse maker, but it's so valuable. And so for, to me, couples who really understand each other's stories, who care about the family systems that each other grew up in, who care about the wounds that we have, that we gained throughout our childhood, throughout our history, and they understand where there's like reactivity or activation or triggers, like those are the things that are going to inspire and transform relationships and dynamics. So to know
Yes.
that is really valuable, and to care about it is really valuable.
To know and care, because you can
Yeah,
know and not care. Yeah,
that's right.
that's yep. So, okay, I want to know what you think about birth order, and if you have any theories or what you've seen in this, because I'm bringing this up because I have a friend and she's like, I will not date the youngest child. They are brats. I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. I've heard people say I don't date only children, and
LOL, I'm an only child.
right. Yeah. I mean, and I know a lot of only children, and I am the youngest, so, but the birth order, have you seen, and do you think when you're talking to a client or something, that where they lie, going back to those origins, where they lie, middle child syndrome, people talk about that all the time as well. Have you seen patterns, or do you have a theory about birth order at all?
Yes, sure. And also, like, let's not over identify, because what happens is then people are like, I will never date an only child. We're like,
Yeah.
we're not so
Yeah,
bad,
like what?
like, right. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so I think yes, but we have got to be able to exist in the nuance and the complexity and the fact that people's stories and life experiences don't all fall into a box, that all first children are this, that all middle children are that all youngest children are this, and that all only children are that. Like,
Children are
that is
yeah.
just so, so, so contained and limiting. So whenever we
Limiting.
have conversations like this, right, it's so important to be like, yeah, sure. Like there's probably some truth and some like pointers and things that we can look at. And also like, let's not be inside of a box, please,
Yep.
please, please,
Yep.
because you'll never get to know someone
Date
if you've already
everything.
defined them, right? You'll
Yes.
never get to know someone if you've already defined them. So,
Mm-hmm.
and listen, it's really interesting, this question, because as I told you, I have a baby on the way here who might be
Yes.
here tonight, who might be here in 2 weeks. I don't know, but there's a
Yes.
baby coming, and I
There's a
also
baby
have a
coming.
3.5-year-old, and so even the like preparation for baby, we are like so much more chill. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much more like, okay, this is going to be different, and there's going to be a transition, and there's a lot of complexity to it, certainly, because we're going from 3 to 4 humans in a family. And also, there's like less intensity around, do we know how to keep this baby alive? Like, do we know what we're doing? Right? Like, we've done this before, and
You're like,
they will be
we feel
different,
confident there.
but we
Yeah.
feel like confident there. And so there is something, of course, right, around, okay, how do parents do it with the first one versus how do they do it with the next versus how do they do it with the next? Now, elements of this that I think go unacknowledged are it becomes so much about the birth order as opposed to where the adults are in their own lives. So, for example, a parents who had their first child in their 20s but had their fourth child in their late 30s.
Okay.
Okay. We could argue that there's some wisdom, some growth, that's some transformation that has happened in those adults' lives. Sometimes people will talk about how, okay, my family was, really didn't have much money at all. But then, the parents, like when my little sister was born, we had a lot of money. And so her experience in the world, she had so much more opportunity. She had so many more activities that she was allowed to do. My parents actually paid for her college when they weren't able to pay for my college or my brother's college or the next person's college, right? And so it's like we will sometimes put so much of the emphasis on the order and forget about the other circumstances that are changing, right? Like what was happening in your parents' life when this child was born, when your sibling was born, when your sibling was born. Think about like deaths that happened, right? Like what was being faced in their lives? What challenge were they going through? Was your parent losing their job when your sister was born? Did your mom lose her father when your brother was born? What was going on? So I want to pull those pieces into the conversation as well. I think sometimes the youngest gets favored. Sometimes the middle gets forgotten. Sometimes the first is the one who felt the most controlled or most like that the parents were the strictest with them because it was the first time
They
for
were the
everything.
first. Yeah.
Is there truth to those things? Probably to some degree. But again, do we overemphasize it and limit people or define them based on it too quickly? Probably. And then do we forget about all of the other things that are going on in the parent's life or the family's life that play into the way that parents parent, right? How the
Yeah.
adults show up. And that to me is I care much more about that. I care much more about understanding each person's experience than I do trying to define who they are based on their order in the
Yes.
sibling chain.
Okay, yes, we have to stop asking that on dates because I go on so many dates and get asked that. They're like, "You're the youngest, aren't you?" Like guys will just say it, like, and I'm just like, "Huh?" I'm like, "How'd you know? What?" It's almost like it's almost first date banter. You know what I mean? It's kind of crazy, but also they say that being a mom is the best job in the world. And it's like, well, if you have one kid, okay, you've had this job for 3 years. Okay, then you're having another kid. It's like now you're 3 years into the job. Hopefully, most people, the longer you have a job, you get better at it.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like, hopefully, right? So it's like, I do think that obviously there's perks. My dad had 6 kids. So I'm one of 6. And he did get better. You know what I mean? When it got down to me, right? So I just think that family dynamics are so important. And to your point, you were saying how you have to understand and care, right? So it's super duper important to know, I think, where someone lands in their family, sure. But I think that you shouldn't cast someone because of that, like cast someone off because of it, like be open to it.
Okay. Can we update that first date question from, oh my God,
Yeah.
you're the youngest, right? To are you the youngest in your family? Yeah, I am. Tell me about what that experience was like for you.
Right.
Stop defining people. Get
Because
to
it's brat.
know
It's brat.
what
You're the youngest, you're a brat.
Right. And it might not be that at all,
That
right?
might
It
not
might
be
not
the
be
case at
that
all.
at all. It might be
Mm-hmm.
the total opposite or somewhere in between, And so I think this, again, like casting people off or defining who they are without them getting a chance to tell you about it is so limiting. It's so limiting. We shouldn't do that to others. We don't want that to happen to ourselves, right? It's like, tell me about the experience of being an only child, and I'm going to give you a really powerful story about what my life was. Get to know my life. Don't need to define me. Get to know my life.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with someone and I was like, "Oh, you're the oldest," and it was only two of them. It's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, did your little brother?" It was a boy. It was like, "Oh, did your little brother look up to you?" And he was like, "Yeah, but I also look up to him in so many ways too." And like that was just like so beautiful that he said that. Do you know what I mean? Like even though I'm the oldest, I also look up to my younger sibling as well, right? So I just was like the idea that we are going to, and again, I think that's also a practice because we are kind of programmed. I think society has programmed us to put us in boxes of what we are. And there's so many different things that are interesting. Like, I love astrology. I think it's interesting, but I also know that there's so many traits that they say about certain signs that I'm like, yeah, I don't see that at all. I don't feel that at all. Because when you become a well-rounded person, you don't have to submit to these things that people say you are. Oh, you're so reactionary. Oh, you're this. Oh, you're that. And it's like, maybe I worked on that and I'm not as reactionary anymore, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, it's so beautifully said, Natasha, right? It is like to not let those outside things define who we are or to define who other people are. There might be elements of it that ring true. And also our job, I think, in this human experience that we're all living and figuring out is, when we want to have depth and intimacy in relationships, our job is to understand ourselves deeply and understand someone else deeply, and to not try to go in pretending like we know something about them. Like, let them be the expert of their lives, which is true in the therapeutic world too. It's like, yeah, people come to therapists and say, okay, well, you're the expert. I'm not the expert on your life. You're the expert on your life, right? You're the expert
Oh,
on your life. And how do we approach
oh,
people that way, right? How do we contain in that way? How do we hold in that way? We could sit here, we could talk about our parents, like, oh my gosh, da 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 da, here's this, here's that. Like at the end of the day, like how much do you know about their life story? Truly, how much have you understood their experience in the world? Not just as a parent, not just as an adult. What do you know about their childhood? What do you know what it was like for them growing up and being a teenager? What were these experiences like? Get to know people. Let them be the experts of their lives. Yes, of course, when you're working with a professional, there's an expertise there. I'm going to be able to ask you questions. I'm going to be able to point certain things out to you that you might not be able to see. And you are still the expert of your life. So if I come in trying to define you, it's going to limit something and our work together is not going to go very far. But if I come in trying to actually understand you, get to know you, get to understand your inner workings, that's the beauty of where this can go.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you do that so well too with your podcast. When you sit down with people and there was an episode that I listened to, and you said that the person was laughing when they would talk about a certain subject, and you were like, "Why do you keep laughing? Where is that coming from?" And then they had to ask themselves that question and see where it came from. And so, we're pro therapy here at Hidden Gems for sure.
Uh-huh.
But it is a beautiful thing. And your podcast, what made you start? So you did the book and then you did the podcast, right?
That's right. Yep.
What made you start the podcast?
I never wanted to have a podcast, and a team went out and like sold the podcast on my behalf without telling me first. And I
Oh,
was like, wait,
wow.
what? Then they're like, well, there's an offer. And I was like, well, okay. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like, well, what is it? And, they presented this idea that instead of it being, an expert to expert conversation, what would happen is we would have anonymous guests come in, just the lay person who was dealing with something in their lives, whether it was, dating, relationship, marriage, children, family, parents, etc. And they would have a 1 hour, one-time consultation with you. And you would get to kind of display some of this work. Obviously, it's not therapy because therapy is built on, the safety and trust of a building relationship over a period of time. And so this was actually really hard. It was a lot harder than therapy, in my opinion, because I didn't have history on them. I got like a few sentences about them before we would sit down. And then it was like, okay, like, let's see where this conversation will go. And it was really beautiful. And it was a really big challenge for me, again, to come in not having information and not having the type of relationship with them as a stranger, as I would with somebody where there's a tremendous amount of comfort and safety and security. But it was amazing to see that, like, when you come in with open mind, open heart, you're willing to be challenged, you're willing to look at things like, where can a conversation go? Where can it lead? What can be experienced? And there are some episodes that are just so beautiful and profound, and it felt like a cool and different professional challenge for me. And so part of why I had said yes to the podcast. And so, yeah, season 1 is out, obviously in a break here. So we'll see if we do it again or not. But it's a really cool entry point. And I think for a lot of people, you will see yourself. I mean, I think this is why the book is so powerful too, because I do so much storytelling in it. And
Mm-hmm.
when sometimes it's harder to see ourselves if it's like us talking about ourselves, but when we
Right.
read about somebody else and we're like, that sounds like me, or we
Mm-hmm.
hear somebody else, oh, I do that. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
something about that is a little bit more palatable for us. And I think
Oh,
there's
yeah.
something so beautiful about hearing other people's stories and being inspired by it, or being reflective about it, or being like, oh, that's my partner, or that sounds like my parent, or that sounds like my adult child. Like, we learn through other people's experiences. And the book and the podcast are a really beautiful way for people to, have that entry point into this work. So yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
bringing that up.
Yeah, I really love it. And I want to, like I said, I love the book. I really only promote things that I love. I love the book, but I wanted to read off some of the chapter names for people, for the listeners here, so they can just, maybe it sounds like you. So, chapter 1, your past is your present. Chapter 2, naming your wound. Oof. Wounds and their origins. I want to feel worthy. I want to belong. I want to be prioritized. I want to trust. I want to feel safe. Changing your relationship behaviors. Oh, that's part 3. Sorry. Changing your relationship behaviors. And then conflict, communication, and boundaries. So, part 2, I want to be prioritized, and I want to trust, and I want to feel safe. I mean, those hit me hard. They hit me hard. And I think you realize when you do, like you said, you go back and you go into your origins and you go where you were and you think about something and you're like, wait, where does this prioritizing come from? And to your point, like, I am dyslexic, so I had to deal with that growing up and not having special help when I was younger. So I have to organize things in my brain first. Like, that's like, if it's disorganized, I'm like, physically I can, like, be disorganized. But if I don't understand something, that's why I'm like, if I have someone on, I need to like read the book. I need to do there is a certain level of organization that if I don't have that, I feel like I'm in disarray. Like I feel untamed. I don't know. And I think that reading your book, I started thinking, and it's like, of all things, I'm thinking about my dyslexia. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? So there's things that come up. And obviously I don't think you mentioned dyslexia at all in your book. But again, to your point, you're listening to a different story, and then you think about yourself, and you're like, oh, wait. And this is my parallel to this thing, and how I got to my prioritizing, and how I want to be prioritized, and how that's so important to me, and things like that. So I myself truly thank you for your book. It's so good.
Thank you. And even what you're saying makes a lot of sense to how you process and organize yourself. When you said like the swing of the pendulum, like I have to take some time and I need to organize myself so that it feels safe in my mind, right? And that it feels safe in my body. So even with that additional piece of context, right, like that makes it make so much more sense too. But yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that the book resonated with you and revealed some things to you, and grateful to have had you read it and to talk about it here.
Yeah, me too. So your Instagram also is a really great resource. You share so much on your Instagram. You do your Instagram lives. How often do you do your lives?
Oh, I don't know. Whenever we're feeling like it, and the Q&A, and
like
just all of that. But yes, we're on there daily, posting something. And yeah, it's Mindful MFT as in marriage family therapy. But when I first started the account, I was like, I just want one person to have a new thought each day, right? To like see something or experience something just through a new lens, new perspective. And obviously it's grown over the years, but that remains the goal. And so happy to share there as often as possible.
And I feel the same way with this podcast. It's like if one person is like, oh, that's a different perspective. We have done our job as like, young thought leaders trying to help people who dissect our own things that we're going through and on this journey, and wanting to, put yourself out there and share the work that you've done. It's amazing. So I thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I loved this conversation with you.
Me too. I love it. Guys, please go follow Vienna. If you, or just check her out. If you are in a moment in time where you're like, I need to pivot, because that's what we be doing on this podcast. We pivot. We're getting unstuck. We're feeling better. We are also, saying goodbye, letting go to some things that we need to let go of. So check her out. She's a great resource. I also, like I said, your book is a gem. We've shared so many gems here today, and I'm just glad to have had this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I will see you guys next week for more hidden gems. And be well. Thanks for listening to Hidden Gems with me, your host, Natasha Parker. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps grow our budding community. Follow me on IG at Natasha Parker and the show at Gems with Natasha. Hidden Gems with Natasha Parker is produced by Gotham Production Studios.